Today we have with us Dr. Koenraad Elst, Orientalist, historian and author. And we are speaking about colonization of the Hindu mind, the idea behind colonizing the Hindu mind and the processes involved in the decolonization of the mind. And we are also speaking about his intellectual input, his intellectual role in the Ramjanmabhoomi movement. So let us join Dr. Koenraad Elst. Thank you for sparing time for us, Dr. Koenraad Elst, and welcome to Samvad at Mayank.
Please.
So, I've been reading a lot of your work for a very long time, and the book of yours, Decolonizing the Hindu Mind, it comes first to my mind. When you say and because you've written a lot about it and talked a lot about it, so the first thing which comes to mind after reading the title is decolonization. So we infer that the Hindu mind was colonized, which needs to be decolonized. So what was this colonization of the Hindu mind all about? And who were the people doing it? And what was the purpose behind this colonization?
Well, there are two colonizations in recent history, namely first the Islamic colonization, which had many traits of European colonization that happened later. For example, in language, I'd say that the Islamic conquest was more colonial than European colonization. For instance, when British soldiers or civil servants were sent from England to India, they had to take an exam of proficiency in what was called Hindustani even before they left Britain. So you see, it was very necessary for them to communicate with the locals in their own language. The Mughal Empire was always administered in Persian, and so they didn't care. They really were a ruling class, and they let it feel. So it was very much a colonial regime. But I'd say that it has colonized the Hindu mind much less. It was very much a physical affair. They exploited the natives. They didn't influence them so much. You see, there was a class of, munshis, of clerks and so on who worked for the colonial regime. That's a bit similar with the British period. But on the whole, they did not influence the local culture. Certain things had to be done by the locals just to survive. For example, the fact that weddings were moved to the nighttime, that was for sheer survival, trying to go in hiding. That's what Hindu society did. But again, you see, their attitude towards those weddings, towards religious festivals and so on, didn't appreciably change. That was more the case with the British period. For example, the Hindu reform movements, Brahmo Samaj and Arya Samaj, adopted the Christian idea of monotheism, tried to explain the fact of Hindu polytheism as many faces to what ultimately is only one God. And that has a certain basis in Hindu scripture, Ekam Sadvi Prabhudha Vadanti, the one reality, the wise men speak in different ways. But still, when you see Hindu practice, it's very obviously polytheist. Like in the Diwali display with Saraswati, Lakshmi, and Ganesh, why are they three different faces? So that difference within the divine is pretty essential for Hinduism. Now, that was being denied, and in a very crude, typically Protestant manner. Also, the use of icons, of murtis, was denounced. And so the attitude of Arya Samajis vis-a-vis traditional Hinduism was very similar to the Christian attitude. you see that mentality till today. Many anglicized Hindus do reshape Hinduism in the fashion of Christianity. So, in that sense, even in strictly religious respects, there is a real colonization of Hinduism that is going on till today.
Till today, because we attained independence in 1947 from the British.
Yes.
So this process of decolonization, you don't see that. I mean, it's not happened, or it's happened at a very slow pace.
Well, in some respects, of course, it has completely happened in the sense that India has become independent. You see, all the colonial things you want to identify in the present system are ultimately maintained by Indians. You see, why are we speaking English? Well, first of all, I have to confess, you see, for me, Hindi is a kitchen language. I speak it with, tea vendors or cleaning ladies or so. Once it gets serious, I have to switch to English because my, knowledge of serious Hindi is very rudimentary. And that's my own laziness, but that's also because you people adopt English once it gets serious.
It's sort of a status symbol for the educated Indians.
Yes.
That we converse in English amongst each other also, with each other also.
Right. But so to describe that problem as one of colonialism is not entirely accurate because the British have left the scene in 1947. And so it is Indians who maintain this. The generation of the freedom struggle, they were the ones manning the Constituent Assembly. They opted for a complete phasing out of English by 1965. That's in the Constitution. According to the Constitution, we shouldn't be talking in English. And so in 1965, the Nehruvian elite managed to get a presidential decree. It has very little legal force, but by presidential decree, they managed to perpetuate the status of English. And so you can only blame fellow Indians for that. There was no viceroy, there was also no new American influence. Nobody told you to do this. It's Indians themselves who perpetuated English.
So what do you suggest needs to be done to expedite this process of decolonization? Any specific sort of steps?
Well, pertaining to English is a very simple thing to do. The government can decide to phase out English. It can do so at any time. It has the constitution behind it. But the will is not there. And I don't see also much resolve among the Hindu population to force the government into any such thing. I mean, I see on social media very many Hindus complain about the government that it's not Hindu enough, contrary to its international image. But they don't do anything to change that. There has been an attempt to set up a rival party that has completely failed, but at any rate, it didn't attract much support from the Hindus. And so, I mean, I think a better way would be to lobby within the BJP to change this political line, but that also isn't happening. So what I would do is something that clearly the Hindus have no stomach for. So there, that stops my advice. And so someone...
No, it would be interesting to hear that.
Yeah, well, you see, you can form a lobby group within a party to influence the party line. Like, for instance, in England in the 70s, 80s, you had the militant tendency within the Labour Party. So these were Trotskyites extreme leftist militants who joined the Labour Party in order to change its line from within. In America, some 20 years ago, in the Republican Party, you had the Tea Party movement, referring to their own independence struggle, that wanted to influence the Republican Party in a conservative direction. And both these movements had some success. Within the Congress Party in the 20s, you had the Hindu Mahasabha, which later became a separate political party, but was originally a lobby group within Congress. You had the Congress Socialist Party that likewise wanted to influence Congress policy in a leftist direction with some success. And so you could form a lobby group within the BJP, but I don't see any enthusiasm for that. Nobody's doing any such a thing. So there you see, my advice is worth what it is worth, but if people don't take it up, well, what can I
So
say?
raising very important points. And speaking of advices, you have seen the Ramjanmabhoomi movement from very close.
Yes.
I mean, you and a few others provided intellectual power to that movement.
Yeah.
So was that a process of decolonization of the Hindu mind, so as to say, or did you see it just as an organic movement?
Well, yeah, we didn't see, nobody used the term decolonization. at
They
the
did
time.
not, but I mean...
No, and indeed, in the 90s, I talked with many people who had been physically in the decolonization movement in the 40s, and they never spoke of decolonization. For them, that was a historical fact that had taken place in 1947. And you see, all this recent, woke discourse about decolonizing, that was totally lost on them. To them that made no sense. Decolonization had already happened.
It had already happened. So, I mean, we are digressing a bit, but I would like you to share your memories of that movement because you have seen it very close. I mean, I have not met anybody who's seen that movement so close. So, your memories of that movement are very.
Well, you see, the scholars' debate, of course, was a very interesting thing. And so you saw many people who were not politically organized and so on, but then they came forward to contribute their bit of knowledge to the case in favor of the pre-existence of a temple. Now, I fairly soon noticed that actually no case has to be made. You see, in 1885, 86, there was a court case, including local Hindus, local Muslims, the British, and so all parties concerned, including the Muslims, agreed that there had been a temple there, that it had been demolished to make way for a mosque. And so that was not controversial at all. And nothing new had been discovered that put a question mark over this consensus. So, in scholarly terms, the consensus was still there. And it is totally artificial that the so-called eminent historians of JNU, of Aligarh, suddenly created this controversy. And indeed, you see all the bloodshed and so on that has also followed is to a large extent due to this artificial controversy that was created.
So you see this as an artificial controversy. There's nothing from the Muslim side per se.
Well, actual riots, of course, were organized by certain Muslim power centers. But on the whole, I'd say the ultimate responsibility lies far more with the secularists than with the Muslims.
So what was the reason behind this, distortion of history? I mean, whose purpose were these people serving? I mean, there must have been something going on.
Well, they wanted to thwart some emerging project of the Hindu nationalists. And so for that, it was necessary in the event to deny these facts of history. And so they did.
Okay. So, Conrad, you have seen the BJP of the 80s during the Ramjanmabhoomi and the BJP of today.
Yeah.
You see that the West sees BJP as the Hindu nationalist party, sort of.
Yes.
That is the symbol
Yes.
which has stuck to them. So, how has this evolution been? Is it really a Hindu nationalist party per se? How do you see this evolution? I mean,
Yes.
academically.
Well, you see, the Hindu caliber at the time was already questioned by a very knowledgeable historian, Sitaram Goel. So he never thought they were very Hindu. They were very nationalist, that is true, and still are. So I think in some respects that did injustice to the cause they were fighting for. Like it was said at that time by them that this was a struggle between the Indian hero Rama and the foreign invader Babar. Now, that was a complete misstatement of the Hindu reason for engaging in this controversy. You see, the fact that Babar was foreign is not the reason why he destroyed the temple. You see, the Greeks have come and they became Buddhists or they became Krishna worshippers. The Huns have come, they became Shaivas. The Kushanas have come, they became Buddhists and so on. They assimilated, they didn't destroy temples. Even the British, who have a lot to answer for, nevertheless didn't destroy temples. On the contrary, they deciphered the Brahmi script, they discovered the Artha Shastra, and so on. They did a lot of ideological work, and maybe sometimes you could say they were motivated, this and that. Anyway, they didn't destroy temples. They contributed to Hindu civilization. They also did things against it, like their education policy, but nevertheless, they didn't destroy temples. By contrast, native Indians like Malik Kafur, like Tipu Sultan, like Aurangzeb, of foreign descent, but already for 5 generations or so, Indian born, destroyed many temples. So this foreign or not foreign is not the point at all. There was a religious conflict. And so that the BJP wanted to avoid. They preferred not to speak about that and put it in simple nationalist terms. The British conservative thinker Samuel Johnson in the 18th century used to say, patriotism is the last refuge of scoundrels. You know, I leave that label scoundrel for him, but at any rate, it's correct to say, yeah, you see, when the message you're trying to sell is a bit too difficult, you can always hide behind patriotism. So that's a bit what happened here.
So there's a bit recent statement from the RSS chief who said that you don't need to, there's no need to start looking for shivlings in every mosque. And there is the other part also, which is that we will reclaim what was ours.
Yes.
So there is a conflict which is brewing. What is your take on that?
Right, yes, I see many people who say, no, we want every temple back. In the long run, that might be a defensible position, but first of all, the damage that you also incur by taking that position, you see all the potential conflicts that you may start this way, are they really worth it? And secondly, is there not some very obvious way that you can avoid all this conflict? And yes, there is. You see, far more important than the stolen temples is the fact that so many Hindus have been abducted from Hindu society, turned into Muslims. sometimes by physical violence, knife to the throat, generally by social pressure. You know, if you had a trial, you know, pitting you against your neighbor, and you hurried to convert to Islam so that it became a Muslim versus Hindu conflict, then you would win your trial. And so there was some social pressure, or craftsmen, you see, the OBCs, and we call them now, just seeking employment with the new elite. The old elite had been killed off or demoted, and so to be in the good books of the new ruling class, you would convert. You know, these things have happened on a rather large scale. So bring these people back. Now, how to do that, how to convince people and so on, that's a science in its own right. Nevertheless, that is possible. And so that's the more important thing to do. You see, souls of your fellow countrymen have been abducted, and you need to bring those back. And then in the long run, they will bring the places of worship back.
Because we have seen that happening a lot in Punjab also, a lot of Christian pastors into conversion only.
Yes.
And now we believe that the demography of Punjab has changed completely. But you've written a book, Negationism in India,
Yes.
Concealing the Record of Islam. So the first thing which comes into mind is the word negationism. What does this mean?
Yes. It's a French term, négationnisme, and it refers to denial of crimes against humanity in general, specifically about the Holocaust.
Okay.
And so then it's in a wider sense, it is also referring to the Cambodian genocide, the Armenian genocide, but principally the Holocaust. So there have been people who deny the Holocaust, who said that these things never happened. And so in especially the 1990s, this was a rather strong movement who had a number of real intellectuals in their ranks. And so they convinced quite a few common people. And so against that, you see, other scholars have stood and so argued the case for the Holocaust. That's more or less a phenomenon of the past. There are still many rank and file, especially in the American far right, and then in the Islamic world on a very large scale. But so let's say that the creative period of negationism is now a thing of the past. You see, the time when serious intellectuals try to give an argument for that, part of the reason being that precisely those very intellectuals, precisely because they were serious, have converted, you know, have seen, well, actually there are proofs for the Holocaust. And so here and there, you know, on details you may differ, the exact numbers you can differ, but on the whole, there was a Nazi plan to exterminate the Jews. About that, there's no doubt. Even you know, prominent people like David Irving, the British self-taught historian, in the around 1990, he was a genuine denier, and now, I mean, he's in his 80s, but he's still active, and so his last work about Himmler. Himmler, the actual architect of the Holocaust, you see in his diaries, in the documents he kept and so on, you do find a number of proofs for the Holocaust. He himself kept tabs on it. And so in sometimes veiled language, but clear enough, you see, he himself wrote about that. And so you see, even people like David Irving have changed their mind. Someone I have known personally, he's deceased by now, Christian Lindner. He was a fellow Orientalist. He was a Sanskritist. And so he was very much a denier. And then he changed his mind in his like 50s. He said, well, actually, I was wrong. And so these things have happened, and so negationism is not so much a challenge anymore. Nevertheless, the word negationism can still be used because there are similar phenomena that do exist still today.
So you mean to say that the track record of Islam in India was there was a deliberate effort to cover that up?
Well, now, here we have to distinguish. Right now, my quarrel in this field is principally with Hindus who insist on using the word genocide. For instance, something not concerning the Muslim record, but the British record, is that they insist that the Bengal famine of 1943 was genocide. Now, you see, the British did not engineer this famine out of a deliberate purpose of exterminating the Bengalis or the Indians or, this population. They had a part in it. You see, their economic policies were such that they facilitated the fact that this mass famine happened. Nevertheless, you see, at the time they were with their back against the walls, they had to make certain strategic choices in the face of the Japanese advances. And so there are a number of, complex reasons that made this possible. Churchill's racist attitude towards Indians may have played a part. About that racism, there's no doubt. He very much looked down on you. But that this made him want to exterminate the Indians, sorry. You see, for that there is no evidence at all. So you have to be careful, if you want to use tall words like genocide, then make sure you have the evidence. For example, the greatest mass death by human hand that has happened in world history, or that we know of at any rate, killed some 50, 60 million people in, I don't know how young you are, but it was still in my lifetime, 1960, 62, the great leap forward in China. Mm-hmm. Now, that was a mistake, that was collateral damage of silly policies. And they were very much caused by the communist nature of the regime, because the provincial authorities, had to be in the good books of the national authority, or they would end up being shot. And so they lied to the central government about the successes of this policy of rural industrialization and so on, that was upsetting, that was sabotaging the agricultural production. So Mao never had an intention of exterminating the Chinese people or the agricultural class. It was collateral damage, even though it killed more people than any large-scale genocide that had ever been committed. And so, if you want to be serious with the words you use, you can't call this a genocide. Mm-hmm. So similarly, the Bengal famine was, of course, a bad thing. And reasons like this background of racism and so on, they certainly played a role. Nevertheless, it's not serious to call it genocide.
But then, I'll come back to the question, who were the people and what was the idea behind this cover-up of negationism which you write in the book?
Okay. Well, again, at second remove, of course, the Muslim community, if ever they're asked about this, but didn't Aurangzeb kill so many people? They tend to be a bit refusative about this, reluctant to admit that. But the real firepower of this denial was again from the secularists. And so that had to do with their enmity vis-a-vis the Hindu nationalists. So for them that came first. Internationally too, today in the West, the ruling class, also in the media, is very pro-Islamic. People in India don't realize, but you see a lot of pro-Islamic and therefore anti-Hindu biases in the media stem from the fundamental pro-Islamic choice of the ruling class in the West. Now maybe with Trump coming to power and so on, that's changing a bit. But so far it has worked out like that. Like, for instance, in Britain, the Pakistani grooming gangs that were, shielded from real punishment, real criticism by Keir Starmer and such authorities. That's a typical and a really bad example. So you had the same attitude here in India, where the secularists were determined, you see, nothing negative about the Muslims. Now here, you're not really saying much negative about the Muslims, only about past generations of Muslims. To what extent should Muslims identify with that? That's an important discussion. But at any rate, I don't think anything good is achieved by denying these facts of history. In Germany, there is no official policy of denying the Holocaust. And, there is no violence, no street riots and so on happening on account of that. So I think Indians are mature enough to face historical facts. Concerning the caste conflict, for example, such policy is not pursued at all. And even though there also exists, and in some places also officially supported, like by the Dravidianists in Tamil Nadu, an anti-Brahminism that is, of course, nurtured by this exacerbation of caste conflict. But so on the whole, you see, people can live with the fact that yes, caste was not always a nice thing to happen. So you see that there are problems in history. Yeah, okay, that's life. You see, that's human history. That's what it's about. So yes, there were serious conflicts, and there's no reason at all to deny that.
It's been a pleasure speaking to you, Dr. Koenraad, and it's been a learning experience, and thank you again for sparing time for us. Thank you and namaste.
Thank you.